Hey, good evening. We're back again. So welcome back to our understanding of Revelation, our study on Revelation. If you missed last week, you can go back on YouTube and catch up on last week. This week I'll do just a little bit of review and then we'll continue on with our study here. So last week we took a look at Revelation, the book, where it's from, the prophecy of the book. We laid a foundation for that, and that Jesus gave this book, this word to us, basically the church, to let us know that we should have hope, that going through all of this times that we're in today, there are a lot of people very fearful. There's a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? And Jesus said to his church, watch and pray, be prepared, be ready. And when you see these signs happening, lift up your head, have hope. This is the sign. I'm coming again. And Jesus talks so much to his disciples, prophets in the Old Testament. The whole book of Revelation is the hope that Jesus gave us. He's coming again. So these are the signs that we're to look for and to watch out. And so last week at the end of our session, I went through the 6 signs that Jesus had given. And again, this is from Matthew 24. It's also found in Mark 15 and Luke 21. So I'm going to go back through those signs real quick, and then we'll go on into some of the other signs that Paul wrote about and the prophets wrote about. And what Jesus was saying, because the disciples kept asking him, when is the end of the age? When are you coming again? What are the signs? How are we going to know? How are we going to know? Because they were living in a time just kind of like what we're living in today. The Romans were over Israel. The Romans were persecuting the Jews. The Jews wanted to get rid of the Romans, and they were asking Jesus, hey, if you're not setting up your physical kingdom, you're not here right now to overthrow the Romans and get rid of them and throw them out of the land, what do we have to wait for? And the disciples, after Jesus talked with them, they were so ready and prepared for him to come back again, that, as we said, Paul even had to write in one of his letters, hey, you didn't miss him, okay? He's not here yet. So that's why Paul wrote additional signs to tell the church, okay? Not just what Jesus said, but also these signs in addition to, okay? So we can't just study Revelation by itself. We have to pull in Jesus' teachings, Paul's teachings, and go back to the Old Testament and pull in the prophets of the Old Testament. So there's a lot that has to come together, okay, to give us what all the steps and process and everything that's going to happen. So Jesus' signs, again, back to Matthew 24. He said, in the last days, in those days, you're going to see false prophets and false Christ and false teaching. That's been there since the beginning of time. But again, Jesus was saying, when you see these signs together, intensity, like a woman giving birth. As you know, when a woman first starts off with contractions, they're X minutes apart. But as the baby comes closer and closer and closer to being birthed, those contractions get quicker and quicker and quicker until right at the end and that baby comes. Well, that's what Jesus was kind of giving them an analogy of. It's the earth is going to go through birth pains. The earth is going to go through contractions. And these signs, they're happening, but it's when they start happening all together in intensity, one after another, bam, 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 bam. That's when you be prepared, be ready. Okay, so many false prophets and teachers are going to arise. Wars and rumors of wars. As we said last week, there have been wars for centuries, but until World War I, the whole world did not get involved in those wars. So now we're seeing the entire world involved. World War I, World War II, the war on terrorism. There's wars everywhere. Famines, again, yes, there have been famines, there have been earthquakes, but the intensity of those famines and those earthquakes in the last several years, last basically 10, 20 years, has just intensified. Persecutions, that's what Jesus meant by tribulations. The church, if you haven't figured it out, the church is being persecuted left and right. It used to be here in the U.S. that the church, every once in a while you would hear something, a church burning, something happened, graffiti, those kind of things. But we are seeing not only the churches themselves, but individuals as Christian. As I said, they have taken God out of the schools. They're trying to take God out of our government, which they're close. They're trying to erase God from every part of our lives. COVID-19 has been just an excuse to shut down churches all over this country. And the churches are having to fight to open back up again. It is our First Amendment right that we can congregate as a church, and they're trying to shut that down. They're persecuting, as we said, business owners who have said, I am standing with my beliefs, and I'm not going to serve those who are different beliefs than mine. On and on and on. Okay, Jesus said when these signs intensify, when they happen one right after another, okay? And we're seeing that today. We are in this today. The gospel be preached around the world, okay? Through every form of media, communication, we're reaching every corner of the world today through missionaries, radio, TV, satellites, okay, social media. I've been in a lot of places, a lot of third world countries on mission trips, and I'm telling you, you go to the poorest areas of those countries, there's phones. People have phones. They may not have electricity. They may not have running water. They may not even have a roof over their head, but they have a phone. Okay? And they will congregate at the person's house in the village, for instance, that has electricity. So wherever we went in some of these villages, literally at night, you would find large gatherings of them, and they would go to, say, the mayor's house of that little village. They would have electricity, and they would watch TV. TBN was everywhere, okay, that we went. So the gospel is being preached around the world. Those are the signs that Jesus spelled out in Matthew for us to look for, okay? Paul, in his writings to Timothy, he went a little bit further. And Paul said, here's two other signs I want you to look for. One, godlessness in the last days, okay, and apostasy, which means falling away from the faith. 2 Timothy, Paul writes to Timothy, and he says, but realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, and he keeps on going, okay, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Also always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. Does that not describe what's going on today or what? Okay, we are seeing this. Now, have people turned away from God? Yes. Have there been lovers of self in the past? Yes. Lovers of money, boastful, arrogant people? Yes. But what with Jesus and Paul, they're both saying, when you see this everywhere, when you see this in intensity, it's just like you can't escape it. It's everywhere you turn, you see this. Those are the signs. Okay? The falling away from the faith. And this is in 1 Timothy 4, 1 through 3. Paul tells Timothy, he said, but the Spirit explicitly says that in later times, some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, by means of hypocrisy of liars, seared in their own conscience as with branding iron, men who forbid marriage and advocate abstaining from foods which God has created to be gratefully shared in those who believe and know the truth. Okay? I mean, Paul says the church is going to fall away. In the end times, before Jesus comes, literally, the believers, the church, is going to fall away from the faith. They're going to turn. Why? Because they're going to be deceived. They're going to be deceived by the enemy. and his lies. We're seeing this in our churches today. We're seeing in our churches today that people are just lackadaisical, okay? Go to church, don't go to church. Well, okay, you know. And it even said that Jesus says in the time, we have to make the time short, because even the believers, the best believers, if you want to look at it that way, will fall away from deception. Okay? So those are the signs that Paul gave, okay, on top of the signs that Jesus gave. And then, huge sign, is Israel. As we said last week, Israel has to become a nation again. In AD 70, when the Roman army came and laid siege to Jerusalem, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, the Jews were scattered. The nation of Israel ceased to exist as a nation. They were scattered all over the world. Okay? They remained Jews, but they didn't have a country. They didn't have a home. You know, that's the only nation, group of people, civilization, if you want to look at that, that has ever been scattered, destroyed, driven out of their homeland, and actually have come back to their homeland and become a nation again, recognized by the rest of the world. Israel is the only one that has ever done that. Okay, that's God. Okay, but in 1948, Israel came back to the land of Canaan, came back to the promised land, and they established as a nation recognized by the world in 1948. In 1967, God gave them back Jerusalem, okay, as their capital city. So good. You can study all kinds of ancient civilizations. You can study a lot of different nations, but Israel is the only one that, in a sense, ceased to exist, but then came back. God restored. That has to happen before Jesus comes again. Okay? So in 1948, first step. 1967, Jerusalem, okay, became the capital of Israel again. Why do we have to have Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? Well, Israel, they're going to rebuild the third temple. Okay? Solomon built the first temple. Herod built the second temple. The second temple is what was destroyed in 70 AD. The third temple has to be built again, because during the time of tribulation, the 7 years of tribulation, before Jesus comes back, the Antichrist himself will desecrate that third temple. I'm going to go into all the details in a little bit, but that third temple has to be built. So right now, if you look at Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock is sitting on the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock is the Muslim, okay, holy shrine. So people for years and years and years, how can the third temple be built if the Dome of the Rock is there? What are you going to do? You're going to destroy the Dome of the Rock? Well, you destroy the Dome of the Rock, the Muslims, yeah, it'd be bad. Well, what they have now since discovered is that the actual temple site is 300 feet from the Dome of the Rock. So the Jews can rebuild the temple in the exact temple spot that it originally was and not destroy the Dome of the Rock. They would have to sit right next to each other. Okay. But again, in order for that to happen, Israel had to be in control of Jerusalem. So during the 6-Day War in 1967, that's what happened. God supernaturally gave the Jews back the city. So today, the Jews could go and rebuild that third temple, which they will. That all has to happen, okay, before Jesus does come again. Okay. So as we get into all the actual events of the 7-year tribulation, we'll talk more about the temple. Okay. So 2 major signs with Israel as a nation has to have happened before Jesus could come back. That has happened. Paul's signs, they are happening today. We're sitting there living that. The signs that Jesus has given us, they're all happening today. We're right in the middle of that. Okay. Then there are 11 signs that the prophets okay, from the Old Testament. Daniel, Zephaniah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah. They have all those Old Testament prophets gave signs of the second coming of the Lord. We looked last week at Isaiah, and we talked about Isaiah 9 and Isaiah 61, how Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet, saw the coming of Jesus and his second coming as one event. Okay, they didn't understand there was a difference. We can see it now that there's a difference because we have lived through these times. But the 11 signs that have to happen before Jesus comes again are these. One, in Revelation 9:16, okay, talking about some of the events that happened during the 7-year tribulation, there has to be a 200 million man army. Okay, that Revelation 9:16 says, and the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. This is John writing. Okay, an army that comes from the east to war against Israel. All right, that number of men has never existed upon the earth, army-wise, until the 1960s and China. China has reached that actual number of men that they could have. They have an army. They could have an army, and 200 million men can march from China, which obviously is in the east, okay, to Israel, okay, to be a part of the battles during the tribulation, okay. So that was one of the signs. Then, two, the redevelopment of the Roman Empire. Okay, we've seen this happen in the last 20-ish years or so with the European community. Okay, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire basically was, obviously the center was Rome, Italy. And the Roman Empire, during its existence, ruled the entire known world at that time. All of Europe, a big part of Asia, the Middle East, and all of Northern Africa. Okay, so if you just make this big giant circle, okay, the Roman Empire ruled all of that land. And the Roman Empire was the strongest empire to ever exist here on this earth. Okay? And since the Roman Empire, we have never seen any worldwide empire, okay, exist. The Roman Empire is the one that they were the ones where Jesus came, because during the time that the Roman Empire existed when Jesus was born was a time what they call Pax Romana. It was a 200-year time of peace. I study the Roman Empire. I teach 8th grade in school this, so it's kind of, I love this, all tying in together here. And during that 200 years of the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire actually existed for almost 2,000 years. During that time, 200 years of peace. One of the things that Rome was famous for was communication and roads and safe travel. So the Romans built roads everywhere. So you could go from one end of the Roman Empire to the other end of the Roman Empire on good roads. You could communicate across the entire empire very well, and you could go in peace. So in 70 AD, when the Jews were dispersed and the Christians went out to the rest of the world, they went in peace. And this is one of the ways that God used, and the gospel could spread so easily. Okay? Because literally the Christians, for a large part, were protected in traveling, and the Jews were protected as well. Okay? Well, the redevelopment of that Roman Empire, what Daniel had said, in Daniel 2:32 through 33, it says, the head of the statue, okay, was made of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Daniel was describing the empires throughout the world, that God had given him this vision. Okay? And Daniel said, then there'll be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break off these in pieces. And in that you see the feet and toes, partially of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have the toughness of iron and partly of pottery, so that some of the kingdom will be strong and some of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Basically, Daniel was describing at first the Roman Empire and then the end empire. And what he's saying is that the fourth kingdom is the nations have come together. And Jesus, if you go further into Daniel, it says that Jesus, when he comes as a rock, will crush the final empire. Okay? And so the European community has formed again to, as some people say today, as a resemblance of a re-rising of that old ancient Roman Empire. Out of that European community, the Antichrist is going to come. And the Antichrist, okay, and again, not getting too much into the details here because we're going to get there, but the Antichrist, when he comes during that 7 year of tribulation, he will rule the world. And all the world will bow down to him. Okay? So the Roman Empire is a re-rising of that. Okay, so that is in place today. But the Antichrist is not ruling yet. Okay, but in a sense, the government structure, the nations, that is there available for him to step in. Okay, when it's time. The return of one pure language, Hebrew, to Israel. Okay, Zephaniah 3:9 says, "For then I will return to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent." Okay, prior to Israel becoming a nation in 1948, Hebrew was dead as a language. Okay, and people did not speak Hebrew. The Jews that were around the world, they adopted the language of the countries that they were living in. Hebrew had died out as a language. When the Jews came back to Israel in 1948, Hebrew is now spoken. It is the official language of Israel again. Okay, so another sign, prophecy that has been fulfilled today, Zephaniah 3:9. The fourth one, rebuilding of the temple, restoration of the temple, worship, and animal sacrifices in Jerusalem. Okay, as I said earlier, this will happen during the 7 year tribulation period. The temple has not been built yet, but several of these prophecies have been fulfilled. Okay, Revelation 11:2. Leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. Basically what they're saying, when they rebuild the third temple, they're not going to build the outer court walls. Okay, in Solomon's temple and in Herod's temple, there was an outer court walls that only the Jewish people could enter into that outer court to worship at the temple. God says in Revelation 11:2, don't build those walls. All nations, all people can come and worship at that temple. Okay, and again, the temple hasn't been built yet, but Revelation 11:2 says they won't rebuild the outer court walls. Daniel 9:27. And he will make a firm covenant with many for a week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolation, even until a complete destruction, one is decreed, and poured out to one that makes desolate. But what Daniel's talking about here is that halfway through the 7 year tribulation, the Antichrist is going to come to the third temple that has been rebuilt, and he's going to desecrate it. Okay, and so Daniel is prophesizing that. And then in Daniel 9:26, he said, then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, so basically this, Daniel is prophesying, again, the temple will be rebuilt. Worship will be restored. Okay, animal sacrifices at the temple will again, okay, start up again. We know that the preparations right now in Israel, all of this is ready to take place. The Jews have I'm going to use the term rebuilt, probably not the best word, but they have reconstructed all of the brazen altar, the lampstand, all of the instruments that are used for sacrifices and for worship in the temple, they were all destroyed and taken away when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem back in AD 70. They have been reconstructed, been rebuilt. Okay, so all of the necessary elements and everything ready for worship at that temple. Okay, the Jews have already, it's there. They have already done so. The group of priests, the shofars, the all of the outerwear, the garments that the priests wear, everything during the worship that God spelled out. Again, this is Old Testament, but everything that the priest and the for their worshiping, the sacrifices, all that's prepared. It's ready to go. Okay, in Israel today, the only thing left basically is to build it. Okay, so they have the instruments, they have the clothing, they have all the equipment. The brazen altar has been rebuilt. The lampstands, if you go back to the Old Testament, you can read God's design for that when he spelled that out for Moses. Okay, basically in the book of Leviticus and Exodus. The appearance of the red heifer. Okay, a red heifer is a sacrifice that they make at the temple during the book of Revelation. Okay, Numbers 19, 2-7 also spell this out. Okay, and it says, the heifer will be burned in his sight. That's the priest's sight. Its hide and its flesh and its blood with its refuse shall be burned. Okay, and it talks about the sacrifice of the red heifer. There has not been a red heifer born for over 2,000 years, okay? But in May of 1997, the first red heifer, pure red heifer, without blemish, without spot, the first red heifer was born in May 1997. And another red heifer was born in March of 2002. Okay, so again, all these things are being put together in place as signs, okay, getting ready for Jesus' coming. Increase in knowledge and travel. Okay, Daniel 12:4. Daniel concealed these words, seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth and knowledge will increase. Billy Graham was quoted as saying one time, 90% of all the engineers and scientists who ever were born upon this earth live right now. I know Billy Graham just passed away recently, but in the last 50 years, just look at it. The last 50, 60 years, literally traveling to the moon. We just put another manned rocket up in space 2 days ago, or a couple of days, well, I think that's back. A week ago. Remember where we are. Okay, so air travel, airplanes, space travel. You talk about increase in knowledge. Phones. When I first got a cell phone, it was this mega box, about this big, that would sit in my car, and it had a receiver on it, just like you used to have an old receiver at your house. Okay, and it was a car phone, literally, because you did not carry it around. I now carry around a cell phone that is a computer. I don't even need a computer to do anything. I got my cell phone. Okay, it's amazing in the technology of what has been in the last literally 50 years. Okay, technology and the advancements in science and medicine, it's phenomenal. That's a sign, increase of knowledge and travel. Okay, so the return of the Ethiopian Jews to Israel. Okay. And also the return of the Russian Jews to Israel. Both of these are signs. So in Zephaniah 3:10 and 11, he says, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshipers, my dispersed ones, will bring my offerings. Okay. In that day you will feel no shame because of all your deeds which you have rebelled against me, for I will remove from your midst your proud exulting ones, and you will never again be haughty on my holy mountain. Okay, so in 1984, Operation Moses began to airlift Jews that were fleeing from the camps in Sudan. Okay, and these Jews, they were fleeing from refugee camps, and they began an airlift, and over 15,000 Jews from 1984 came back to Israel. Okay, in 1991, Operation Solomon flew 20,000 Jews from Ethiopia itself, brought them back to Israel. Okay, and in June of 1999, another 3,000 members of a Jewish community from northeastern Ethiopia was brought back to Israel. So again, a sign, end times. Zephaniah says Ethiopian Jews will come back. We've already been seeing it going on. Okay, I'll skip to the next one, the Russian Jews. Okay, return of the Russian Jews in Jeremiah 23, 7 and 8. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, will they'll no longer say, as the Lord lives, who brought up the sons of Israel from the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives, who brought up and led back the descendants of the household of Israel from the northland and from all the countries that I've driven them. Okay, the northland in the Bible is Russia. So starting in the 1970s and the 1980s, there was a mass exodus of Jews from communist Russia that have come back to Israel. And in 1999, they said there was another exodus. Bottom line, there are tens of thousands of Jews returning from Russia to Israel, okay, fulfilling the prophecy of Jeremiah. The rise of Russia, okay? We're going to talk about Russia a lot when we get into the tribulation itself. Ezekiel 38, 2, 4, and 8 says, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. I will turn you about and put hooks in your jaws, and I will bring you out and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them splendidly attired. And after many days you'll be summoned. In the latter years you will come into the land that is restored, talking about Israel, okay? So just reading part of that, Russia has a huge part in this play of tribulation, the end times. Russia had to become a massive nation in strength, okay? And we all know that. Russia is a world power, okay? Now, that began, obviously, after World War II. So Russia's been around for a long, long time, but being a world power with the force it has in the world today, after World War II, okay? All right, another sign, technology for the mark of the beast. Okay, if you have not been watching news lately, then you've had your, okay, I had a bucket over your head, basically. Bill Gates and some of his buds are out there saying they want everyone to take a vaccine for the COVID-19 with an implant. Okay, if that is not sign, not saying it's the mark of the beast, but saying it's a sign of the technology of the mark of the beast, because in Revelation it says the mark of the beast is an implant. It will be on your forehead or on your hand. Okay, bottom line is the technology is there for implants to be put into everyone. Okay, so basically they can track you. They know where you are. The book of Revelation says that without that implant, that mark of the beast, you will not be able to buy food. Okay, we'll get into the mark of the beast, but the technology had to be there. It is. I mean, it's there today. There have been people, actually, I would take back in 2010, there was a family in Florida. Okay, they actually became the first people to receive this biochip implant. Okay, and so it was. It's here. It's been here for a little bit. The technology is definitely there. Okay, instant communication around the world. We know that during tribulation, we'll see this, there are going to be two witnesses that are going to stand at the temple in Jerusalem. And for 3.5 years, those two witnesses are going to tell the world what is going on during this tribulation. They're going to be warning the world, telling the world, turn back to God. These two witnesses. Well, it says that these two witnesses are seen by the whole world. Okay? In Revelation 11, okay, verse 3, 7 through 10, they will prophesy for 260 days. And when they finish their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, Jerusalem, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also the Lord was crucified, Jerusalem. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days. Okay, so what is that? Those peoples from tribes and tongues and nations, he's saying the whole world will look at those dead bodies for 3.5 days lying there at the temple. Okay, those two witnesses. And it says, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they'll send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Okay, they tormented them with their words. Turn to God, turn to God. So with television today, 24-hour news network today, satellites, the whole world can see. The whole world can watch. Okay, so these are signs from the 11 signs from the prophets from the Old Testament, as well as tying into Revelation, that all have to be in place and all have to happen today, again, for Jesus' second coming. This is not one of the 11, but plans for a one world government, one world religion, and one world currency. As y'all know, my husband, he is big time into finances. And he has been talking about this, a cashless society. We're seeing it happen today, where how many younger, okay, people walk around with cash in their pocket. Okay, now I do, but I don't use cash. I got a card. Got a credit card. Now I got my phone. You don't even need a credit card anymore. You got your phone. You can Google Pay, or you could Apple Pay, or you could Samsung Pay, or whatever. We don't even need credit cards anymore. Phones. Okay? The technology for doing away with cash, first of all, that'd be the first step. The technology, as they said, for iris scans, so that you could walk up an ATM machine and you could just look right into the camera. It'll scan your eye, and then you can have access to your bank accounts. Well, my phone does iris scan, so I can open my phone by my eyes. I can open apps with just scanning my eyes. So these are steps that we're going through to get ready to one world currency, okay? One world government, one world religion. All of this is going to happen during the tribulation period, those 7 years of tribulation before Jesus comes back. Everything is in place, okay? I don't have time. I could spend literally hours talking to you about all of this, okay, and the steps they're made, but everything's in place. Well, we could talk to you about hours of the technology for the mark of the beast on any of these. But I wanted to just show you with the time we have, these are all the signs that Jesus said are going to have to take place before he comes again. Okay? And again, I'm throwing these out to you. We're going to get into literally detail, step by step, of the 7-year tribulation. But all of these things we're seeing now. Okay? And what I like to say is that all we're waiting for is Jesus in the rapture. Because he's going to take the church out of here. We are not going to live through that tribulation period. Okay? But I'll talk about that. But we're not going to live through that tribulation period. We'll be with Jesus in heaven during that time. But everything's there. It's all set. We're just waiting for that trump to sound in the sky and Jesus to come get us. Okay? If you ever talk to Arnold enough, he lives for the day. Talks about it a lot. Okay? All right, so with Jesus and his signs, with Paul and the signs that he talked about, with the prophets and the signs there, we just go back through this and we can see there is nothing at this point keeping Jesus from coming. There's nothing at this point. Now, before Jesus comes, again, we got to go through the tribulation, but there's nothing stopping it, okay? There's no other signs. There's no other prophecies that we know about Okay, I'm not saying that we know about those that have studied tribulation, those that I've talked to about all this, the scholars of tribulation. There are no other signs that we know, okay, than these that have to take place. Okay, all of these signs and prophecies that have been spoken, or they're in the Bible, they're there. They've all been fulfilled. Okay, so we're, just like I said, we're waiting. And Jesus gave that, he gave that story, we're going to call it a parable, but he gave that teaching about the 10 virgins, which is in Luke. And right with this teaching of Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus taught, and it's recorded in Luke, about the 10 virgins. And he said the 10 virgins all had oil in their lamps. And they were ready, they were prepared, but time went on. And 5 of the virgins kept the oil in their lamps, okay? And 5 let the oil run out. And then the bridegroom came. And the 5 that had the oil in their lamps, they went with the bridegroom. The 5 that had let the oil, okay, basically go out of their lamps and let the light go out, those 5 said, wait, hold on. Don't leave us. We got to run and we got to go get oil. And then we'll come back and then we can go with you. Okay? But by the time they went to go get refill their lamps, the bridegroom and the 5 prepared virgins had already left. Okay? And the 5 unprepared basically got left out. So as a sign, Jesus was saying this: don't let the oil go out of your lamps. Okay? Don't let the world and the cares of the world, don't let your life just get complacent to where you let the oil, which signifies the Holy Spirit, don't let the Holy Spirit go out of your life. Don't let the oil go out of your lamps, because the bridegroom's going to come, okay, when you don't know it. You know, he can come in the middle of the night, he can come in the middle of the day, but he's going to come in a time where we aren't going to know it, but we have to be prepared. And if you don't want to be one of those 5 virgins that oils ran out, okay? Because when you take that time then to go refill your lamps and go get some more oil, it's too late. Okay? So Jesus talked about, if you don't know that teaching and that story, that's in Luke, that Jesus talked about. And he was doing, at the same time, he was giving the signs of the end times and answering the questions. Okay, what do we look for? What are signs? When are you coming back? Okay, at those. Oh, I thought I had back up there. I don't. Okay, in Luke 21, Luke 21, read that. Okay, and that's what that teaching and parable was all about. Be ready, be prepared. Okay. All right, so next week, we're going to look at, actually, we got to talk about Satan. We got to talk about hell. We got to talk about, is it real? Okay, why is this going on? Why is tribulation going to happen? Why is there this 7 years of tribulation that Jesus is telling us about, this whole book of Revelation? Why can't Jesus just come back and take us all with him and we all go to heaven? Okay, because there's a reckoning. There is a time of judgment that God has. It's all his plan. So next week we're going to get into that part of it, and we're going to talk about the why. We're going to take a look at the devil and his role in all this, where he came from and who he is and what's going to happen to him, because I promise you, in the end, the devil is defeated. God's going to do away with him. Thank you, Lord. Okay, we're not going to have to mess with him anymore. So that's going to be next week's lesson. So I hope you join us again next week.